The village of Nyoka lay nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, a place where traditions ran deep, and fear of the unknown ruled the hearts of its people. The villagers thrived on farming, fishing, and storytelling, passing down legends that shaped their beliefs. Among these stories was one about the cursed ones, those whom misfortune followed like a shadow. It was whispered that such people disrupted the harmony of the land, angering the spirits that watched over the village. Nia had always been different. From the moment she was abandoned as a baby and left at the doorstep of an old widow, strange things had surrounded her. The woman who took her and passed away when Nia was only 5, and from then on, she belonged to no one. She grew up alone, scavenging for food, avoiding the cold stares of those who crossed her path. The villagers muttered that wherever she went, trouble followed. A goat would break its leg, a child would fall sick, or a storm would ruin harvest. It didn't matter that none of these events had anything to do with her, people needed someone to blame, and Nia was an easy target. The children mocked her, calling her a child of bad luck. The elders warned others to stay away. If she approached the market, the women selling goods would clutch their baskets, fearing her presence would drive away customers. The blacksmith refused to let her stand too close to his shop, muttering that the last time she lingered nearby, his best hammer broke in half. Even the kindest of villagers pitied her but dared not defend her, afraid they too would fall victim to whatever curse followed the orphan girl. As the years passed, the whispers turned into something more dangerous, fear. And fear, when left unchecked, became cruelty. One evening, dark clouds gathered over Nyoka, the sky rumbling with a warning of an impending storm. The wind howled through the trees, rattling doors and windows, making the village uneasy. The elders gathered in the chief's hut, their faces etched with worry. The season had been unkind, crops were failing, the river had flooded twice, and the chief's only son had fallen mysteriously ill. The village needed an answer. They needed something, or someone, to cast away their misfortune. It was the eldest among them, a man whose voice carried weight, who spoke the words no one wanted to say but all had thought. The girl. Nia. A heavy silence filled the room. No one challenged him. The decision was made swiftly, as if speaking it aloud had lifted the burden from their hearts. The storm was growing, and they would act before the heavens unleashed their wrath. The elders left the hut and gathered a handful of the strongest men in the village. No one asked questions. No one hesitated. They knew what had to be done. Nia was found near the riverbank, sitting alone as she often did, her thin frame curled against the roots of an old tree. She barely looked up as the men approached, but when she did, she saw something in their eyes that sent a chill through her bones. It wasn't the usual disdain or annoyance. It was decision. She scrambled to her feet, but there was nowhere to run. Rough hands grabbed her arms, pulling her toward the raging river. She kicked, screamed, begged, but her voice was drowned by the howling wind and the muttered prayers of those who watched. "The spirits will forgive us," one of the elders whispered. The river roared like an angry beast as they reached the edge. Nia's heart pounded against her ribs, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She saw the faces of the villagers, some looking away, some staring with cold determination. No one stepped forward to stop this. No one called her by her name. With one final push, her world tilted, and the cold embrace of the river swallowed her whole. The river did not take Nia as the villagers had hoped. Instead of pulling her into its depths, the currents cradled her, wrapping around her like unseen hands. The force of the water should have crushed her, but something else was at work, a presence, a will beyond her understanding. Beneath the surface, the world was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the currents. Nia's limbs felt weightless, her body suspended in a space between life and death. As the water carried her further, shapes began to form in the darkness. Shadowy figures, neither fully human nor entirely spirit, drifted around her. Their whispers curled around her ears, voices like the wind moving through trees. "Child of sorrow, child of fate. The river has chosen you. You do not belong to them. You belong to the water, to the earth, to the unseen ones." Nia's chest burned as she struggled to hold her breath, her vision dimming. A soft hand, cold as the river itself, brushed against her forehead. The moment it touched her, a strange warmth spread through her veins. The river spirits were not letting her die. They were carrying her somewhere beyond the reach of those who had thrown her away. Her consciousness slipped, and everything turned black. When Nia awoke, the sun was hot on her skin, its golden light filtering through the leaves of a towering tree. The air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers, and the steady rush of water echoed nearby. She gasped, sitting up abruptly, her body aching as if she had been asleep for years. Her dress was torn, her limbs bruised, but she was alive. She was no longer in Nyoka. A gnarled hand touched her shoulder, making her flinch. She turned sharply, meeting the gaze of an old woman with dark, wrinkled skin and silver hair braided with small bones and beads. Her eyes, sharp and golden like a hawk's, studied Nia with an unreadable expression. "You have been touched by the river," the woman said, her voice low and knowing. "It does not take just anyone. Only those it chooses." Nia's lips parted, her throat dry and raw. "Where am I?" she croaked. "The place you were meant to be," the woman replied simply. The old woman lived in a small hut nestled deep in the forest, far from any village. She led Nia there, moving with a grace that did not match her years. Inside, dried herbs hung from the ceiling, and the air smelled of smoke and something sweet. A pot of steaming broth rested over a small fire, and Nia's stomach clenched at the scent. The woman handed her a wooden bowl. "Eat," she commanded. Nia hesitated for only a moment before bringing the warm liquid to her lips. It was rich, full of unfamiliar spices, and as it slid down her throat, she felt strength return to her limbs. For a long while, the woman said nothing, watching her with those piercing golden eyes. Then she spoke again. "They feared you," she said. "They threw you away because they did not understand what you are." Nia's hands trembled around the bowl. "I am nothing," she whispered. The woman's expression darkened. "You are not nothing, girl. You are something powerful. Something the spirits have claimed." Nia shook her head, gripping the bowl tighter. "I don't understand. I'm just a girl. They said I was cursed." The woman snorted. "Curses, blessings, do you think the river cares for such things? It does not waste its power on the ordinary." Nia's breath hitched. "Why did it spare me?" The woman leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because you are not meant to die forgotten in that village. You are meant to change your fate. And theirs." A chill ran through Nia despite the warmth of the fire. The words stirred something deep inside her, something she did not yet have the courage to name. She had been thrown away. But she was still here. And she was not the same girl who had fallen into the river. The village of Nyoka settled back into its routine as if Nia had never existed. The market filled with chatter once more, children played freely, and the elders sat in their usual gathering spot, speaking of the coming harvest. A strange sense of ease settled over the people, a relief they did not voice aloud. The curse was gone. Mala, the chief's proud and spoiled daughter, basked in the attention. She walked through the village with her chin high, her friends giggling beside her. "It was my idea," she boasted. "The elders were too afraid to act, but I saw the truth. That girl was cursed. Now, look, our village is safe again." The others nodded in agreement, though some averted their eyes. No one spoke of how Nia had pleaded, how her frightened eyes had searched the crowd for a savior who never came. No one wanted to remember. Days passed, then weeks, and Nyoka flourished. The river ran clear, the crops thrived, and the sky remained bright and blue. But then, small things began to change. It started with a mist, thicker than the morning fog, clinging to the village long after the sun had risen. The elders dismissed it as nothing unusual, but the mist did not fade. It slithered between the huts, seeping into cracks, curling around the people like unseen fingers. Then came the animals. Goats refused to graze, their eyes wide and wild. The hunting dogs whined at night, refusing to leave their shelters. Birds that once sang at dawn now fell silent, watching the villagers with dark, unblinking eyes. At first, the villagers ignored these signs. But then, whispers began. They started in the wind, soft as a sigh, floating through the trees. Why did you betray her? She did nothing to deserve it. She is not gone. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men who once laughed at the idea of spirits now glanced over their shoulders. The village healer left offerings by the river's edge, muttering prayers under his breath. Mala tried to act unbothered. She laughed louder, spoke grander, but her hands trembled when she tied her braids in the morning. One night, as she lay in her hut, something cold brushed against her cheek. She bolted upright, heart hammering. A breath, just by her ear. I am coming. She screamed. The sun had begun to set, casting an eerie golden glow over the village of Nyoka. The mist, which had clung stubbornly to the land for days, thickened as the villagers gathered by the river. They came out of habit, fetching water, washing clothes, whispering about the strange happenings. The whispers grew louder that evening, a nervous murmur floating above the rushing water. Then, the mist shifted. A figure emerged from the river, stepping onto the shore with slow, deliberate movements. The water dripped from her tattered clothes, her dark hair clinging to her face. Her bare feet sank into the wet earth, yet she did not shiver. Nia. A gasp rippled through the villagers, then a scream. The women dropped their baskets. The children clung to their mothers. Even the strongest men took a step back, their eyes wide with terror. She's dead, someone whispered. She's a ghost, another voice trembled. Nia said nothing. She stood there, her deep, unblinking eyes scanning the faces of those who had once thrown her away. She did not smile, did not cry, she only stared, as if peering into their very souls. The village erupted into chaos. Some ran for their huts, barricading their doors with trembling hands. Others fell to their knees, wailing prayers to the river spirits for mercy. The elders huddled together, their once confident faces drained of color. Chief Omari, his authority cracking beneath fear, pointed a shaking finger. This is a trick, he bellowed. It cannot be real. Mala, standing behind him, could not move. Her entire body felt frozen, her breath trapped in her throat. This wasn't possible. They had thrown Nia into the river. She had drowned. She was supposed to be gone. But she was here. The whispers in the wind grew stronger. The mist curled tighter around them. The river, once calm, roared louder as if laughing at them all. Nia took another step forward, her gaze landing on Mala. Mala stumbled backward, her mind screaming for her to run, but her legs would not obey. The villagers dared not look into Nia's eyes for too long. There was something unnatural about them, something ancient, something knowing. Please, one elder stammered. If we have wronged you, if we have offended the spirits, tell us how we can make it right. Still, Nia did not speak. The villagers felt the weight of her silence, heavier than any curse. The mist wrapped around her like a veil, her soaked dress clinging to her thin frame. Yet there was no weakness in her stance. Then, finally, Nia tilted her head. And she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not one of kindness. It was a knowing smile, a reminder. The villagers had thrown her away. But she had returned. The whispers slithered through Nyoka like snakes, curling into every hut, every firelit gathering, every restless dream. Nia was not just a girl anymore, she was an omen, a warning, a shadow that refused to be buried. Some villagers, gripped by guilt, began leaving small offerings outside her hut, a bowl of fresh yams, a woven cloth, a carved wooden charm meant to ward off spirits. They never knocked, never spoke her name aloud, but the gifts appeared every morning like desperate prayers. They hoped that if they fed the spirit, it would not turn its wrath upon them. Yet Nia never acknowledged them. She would step out each dawn, see the offerings, and leave them untouched. The villagers did not know whether to feel relieved or terrified. Others, however, were not so easily convinced of her supernatural power. She is no spirit, grumbled Chief Omori, though his voice lacked its usual authority. She is a girl. A girl we should have dealt with properly. Mala, standing in the shadows of the chief's hut, clenched her fists. She could still feel the weight of Nia's stare from that night at the river. The way her dark eyes had settled on her, unblinking. She had not spoken a single word, but Mala had felt it, Nia knew. And that was dangerous. She's playing with us, Mala hissed, stepping forward. If we do nothing, she will turn the whole village against us. One of the warriors nodded. People are afraid. They speak of curses. If they believe she has power, she will rule them. Mala's jaw tightened. She could not let that happen. The thought of the orphan girl, the outcast, holding power over them made her skin crawl. We must end this before it's too late, she said coldly. She survived once. This time, she won't. But even as Mala spoke the words, a gust of wind howled through the village, rattling doors and snuffing out torches. The villagers shuddered, pulling their shawls tighter, eyes darting to the misty edges of the forest. Somewhere, just out of sight, Nia stood in the darkness. Watching. Waiting. Night draped Nyoka in uneasy silence. The torches outside the chief's hut flickered wildly, casting restless shadows on the walls. Inside, Chief Omori lay still, his breath shallow, his skin clammy with fever. The best healers in the village had tried their remedies, herbs, chants, offerings to the gods, but nothing worked. Outside, the villagers whispered among themselves. Some said the spirits were punishing them. Others, their voices hushed with fear, murmured a different possibility. Nia. Mala scoffed at the idea. You think she has power? She's just a girl. But the village wasn't so sure anymore. Ever since Nia had returned, strange things had been happening. The river, once so full, had begun to recede, leaving cracked earth in its wake. The crops wilted under an unseen force, their leaves curling like frightened fingers. The goats, once fat and healthy, had begun wasting away. And now, their chief, the man who had ordered Nia's fate, lay on the edge of death. That night, as the village kept watch outside his hut, a figure slipped past them. Barefoot, silent, unseen. Inside, Nia stood over the chief's frail body. His breath rattled in his chest, a sound too thin, too weak. She knelt beside him, pressing her palm against his damp forehead. For a long moment, she remained still, eyes closed, lips unmoving. Then, as if something unseen passed between them, the chief shuddered. His breath deepened. The fevered flush on his skin faded. A long, slow sigh escaped his lips, and his body relaxed for the first time in days. By morning, Chief Omori woke. He rose from his bed, stronger than he had been in weeks. The village gasped in astonishment. She healed him, someone murmured. But how? If she was a curse, why would she save him? Confusion spread like wildfire, challenging everything they had believed about Nia. Had they wronged her? Had the river spared her for a reason? Before they could make sense of it, another figure arrived at the village gates. Wrapped in a tattered cloak, leaning on a twisted wooden staff, the old woman from the river walked into Nyoka. Mala's heart stopped. She had thought the old woman was just a myth, an eerie rumor whispered among those who feared the spirits. But now, the woman stood before them, her gaze sharp, knowing. I have come to tell you the truth, she said, her voice echoing through the stunned village. She turned to Nia, her lined face unreadable. It is time. The villagers held their breath, waiting. The truth about Nia was about to be revealed. The old woman's voice carried through the village like the wind before a storm. The villagers, still shaken from the chief's miraculous recovery, huddled together, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. Even the bravest among them dared not interrupt. Nia stood in the center of it all, silent, her gaze steady. You believe she is a curse, the old woman began, sweeping her sharp eyes over the crowd. You believe the river spared her out of vengeance. But you are wrong. You always have been. Mala scoffed, crossing her arms. Then tell us, Old One. What makes her so special? The woman's wrinkled hand pointed at Nia. She is the daughter of Sephu, the greatest healer Nyoka ever knew. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged uncertain glances, while the elders stiffened. The name was known but rarely spoken. Sephu had been a healer with power beyond understanding, a woman whose very touch could mend the gravest wounds. But she had died. Long ago. The old woman continued, her voice like rustling leaves. Sephu was betrayed. Feared for her gifts. When the chief's firstborn son fell ill, she healed him. But rather than reward her, the elders turned against her. They whispered that her powers were unnatural, that she had only cured the boy because she had first cursed him. An elder's face darkened. That is not the full truth. The old woman's eyes flashed. Then speak it. The elder hesitated but sighed, nodding. It is true. We feared Sephu. We did not understand her power. And when the drought came soon after, we blamed her. The chief's advisors ordered her exile. Mala's mouth curled in disdain. And what does that have to do with Nia? The old woman's voice softened. Because Sephu was pregnant when she was cast out. The words struck the villagers like a thunderclap. Their eyes turned to Nia. She was born under the moonlight, by the same river you threw her into, the old woman said. Her mother raised her in secret, away from the village that had betrayed them. But when Nia was just a child, Sephu fell ill. Without a village, without healers, she could not be saved. With her last breath, she prayed to the river spirits to protect her daughter. And they did. Nia's hands curled into fists. She had always wondered about her past, why she had been left alone. Now, she knew. The old woman took a step forward. The river did not curse this village. You cursed yourselves when you turned on the one who only wished to help you. And when you threw Nia into the river, you nearly destroyed the only chance you had left to set things right. A thick silence fell over Nyoka. The people looked at Nia, not as a ghost, not as a curse, but as something else entirely. Hope. But not everyone was convinced. Mala stepped forward, her voice sharp. So what? She was born from a healer. That does not make her one. She has done nothing but bring trouble. The villagers murmured in uncertainty. Some still feared Nia, some still doubted. But then, Chief Omari stepped forward. The man who had ordered Nia's fate. He walked until he stood before her. And then, to the shock of the entire village, he dropped to his knees. I was wrong, he said, his voice raw. I believe the whispers. I believe the fear. But I know the truth now. He raised his eyes to her, filled with something neither pride nor shame could mask. You saved me when you had every reason to let me die. That is not the act of a curse. That is the act of a leader. The crowd stirred, whispers passing between them. One by one, the villagers knelt. Mothers. Fathers. Hunters. Healers. Even the elders bowed their heads. But Mala. She stood frozen, her pride a heavy weight on her shoulders. Nia looked at her, and for the first time, she spoke. You do not have to kneel. Mala's lips parted in shock. Nia turned to the village. I do not seek your fear. I do not want revenge. I only want what my mother wanted. To heal. Tears welled in the eyes of the oldest villagers. The chief, still on his knees, whispered, Then heal us, Nia. And in that moment, Nia knew. She had never needed the village. The village had always needed her. The air was thick with tension in Nyoka as the village struggled to reconcile the truth about Nia. Some accepted her as their savior, but others, like Mala, refused to bow to fate. She's fooling all of you, Mala hissed to a small gathering of villagers under the cover of night. She is no healer. She is no queen. She is a girl who should have drowned, yet she walks among us like she owns this land. A nervous murmur spread among the small group. These were the ones who had always feared change, the ones who had clung to the old ways even as the village suffered. One man, his hands calloused from years of farming, shook his head. The chief himself has acknowledged her. What if she truly is the only one who can save us? Mala's jaw tightened. We do not need saving. We need our village back. The one that thrived before she returned from the dead. She pulled out a small pouch, untying the string to reveal a dark powder. This will end it. She will not survive. The villagers exchanged wary glances. Poison, someone whispered. Mala's eyes darkened. Call it justice. That night, the village prepared a feast in honor of Nia, a gesture of unity, or so it seemed. The firelight flickered against the mud huts, casting long shadows over the people as they gathered. Nia, dressed in simple cloth, sat near the center, unaware of the whispers circling around her. Mala approached with a carved wooden cup, her face a mask of false humility. A drink, to welcome our healer back home, she said smoothly, extending the cup to Nia. The liquid inside was thick, dark, and sweet-smelling, strong enough to hide the bitterness of the poison. The villagers held their breath. Some knew what Mala was planning but said nothing. Others simply watched, confused. Nia met Mala's gaze. There was no warmth in the chief's daughter's eyes, only cold determination. For a moment, Nia hesitated. Then, without breaking eye contact, she lifted the cup to her lips. The moment the liquid touched her tongue, the wind howled. The flames of the bonfire trembled and stretched, as if drawn by unseen hands. The sky, once clear and dotted with stars, darkened with thick, swirling clouds. A sharp cry echoed through the village as a powerful gust of wind swept through, knocking over baskets and sending embers flying. Then came the first crack of thunder. Lightning split the sky, striking dangerously close to the gathering. The villagers screamed, scrambling away from the bonfire as the wind carried a sound not of this world, a low, whispering chant, layered upon itself 100 times over. The river spirits had awoken. Nia's body went rigid, her eyes rolling back as if pulled by an unseen force. The cup fell from her hand, shattering against the earth. The villagers turned to flee, but the storm raged on, trapping them within its furious grasp. Mala stumbled backward, her face frozen in terror. She had not believed in Nia's power. She had not believed in the river spirits. But now, as the very earth trembled beneath them, she understood, Nia was not just an orphan, not just a girl who had survived. She was something far greater. The wind screamed through the trees, and a deep voice rumbled through the storm, a voice that was neither human nor entirely divine. You tried to take what was chosen by the river. The villagers fell to their knees, shielding their faces as dust and leaves swirled around them. Nia gasped, her body convulsing, and suddenly, the storm stilled. The silence that followed was deafening. She opened her eyes. They glowed with the reflection of the storm's energy. Mala, still trembling, could barely form words. What are you? Nia took a slow step forward, her voice steady. I am what you tried to throw away. And now, the river has decided what is to come. At her words, the village well, once dry for weeks, overflowed with crystal-clear water. The crops, withered and brown, trembled as new green leaves unfurled before the villagers' eyes. The air, heavy with the scent of rain, grew still and warm. The spirits had spoken. Those who had doubted her, those who had tried to destroy her, now watched in stunned silence as the truth set itself before them. Mala, defeated, fell to her knees. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Nia looked down at her, her expression unreadable. You feared me, she said softly. But it was never me you should have feared. It was the weight of your own heart. The villagers, one by one, bowed their heads. And at last, the storm passed. The sky churned with dark clouds, the storm refusing to pass. Lightning crackled above as the wind howled through the village, carrying whispers that did not belong to this world. The villagers trembled, their faces pale as they stood before the girl they had once cast away. Nia stood at the heart of it all, her feet planted firmly in the damp earth. The river spirits swirled around her like a living force, unseen but deeply felt. Her presence was no longer that of a mere orphan, she was something greater now, something untouchable. The river does not forget, her voice rang through the storm, though her lips barely moved. It does not forgive easily. The elders fell to their knees, their once proud faces filled with remorse. Even the chief, once unshaken by anything, bowed his head. His voice was hoarse as he spoke. "We were blinded by fear," he admitted. "We believed we were protecting the village, but instead, we doomed ourselves." A murmur of agreement spread among the villagers. Their mistakes had nearly destroyed them. The land had suffered under their choices. And now, the spirits themselves had returned to demand judgment. Nia stepped forward, her glowing eyes scanning the faces before her. "You cast me into the river," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You left me to die. But the river carried me. It showed me the truth." The people cowered as the wind roared again, sending dust flying through the air. Nia raised a hand, and the chaos stilled, as if the storm itself obeyed her. "I ask you now," she continued, "will you change?" The villagers sobbed, nodding frantically. "Yes. We will never make the same mistake again," someone cried. The spirits lingered, watching. But not all were willing to submit. Mala, still standing, gritted her teeth. "This is madness," she hissed. "You are no queen, no chosen one. You're just a girl we should have gotten rid of properly." She turned, her feet digging into the mud as she ran. But the river had been watching. As Mala sprinted toward the trees, a deafening crack of thunder split the sky. The villagers turned just in time to see the river surge forward, its waters moving with terrifying speed. The currents twisted like fingers, reaching, grabbing. Mala let out a scream as the water coiled around her ankles. She clawed at the ground, but the river was stronger. With one final, desperate gasp, she was pulled beneath the surface. The village fell silent. The storm softened. The wind calmed. The rain slowed to a light drizzle. Nia closed her eyes, listening. The river spirits had spoken. When she opened them again, the villagers were still watching, waiting. The chief, still kneeling, met her gaze. "What must we do to make this right?" he whispered. Nia exhaled, the glow in her eyes fading slightly. The spirits had given her the choice. She looked over the trembling faces, the ones who had feared her, hated her, betrayed her. And yet, she saw something new in their eyes now. Not fear. Hope. She took a deep breath. "We start again," she said. "Together." And with those words, the storm passed. As the first light of dawn broke through the dissipating storm clouds, the village stood in stunned silence. The wind had stilled, the river had calmed, and yet, the weight of their actions still lingered in the air. The people looked at Nia, their faces filled with awe, guilt, and something they had never shown her before, respect. She stood tall, her gaze steady as she surveyed the faces of those who had once turned their backs on her. The spirits had spoken, and the river had claimed its price, but she knew vengeance was not the answer. "The past cannot be changed," she said, her voice carrying through the crowd, "but the future is still ours to shape." The villagers fell to their knees, pleading for her mercy. Some wept openly, realizing the cruelty they had shown an innocent girl. The elders, humbled by the power they had witnessed, lowered their heads in shame. "We were wrong," the chief said, his voice heavy with regret. "We let fear guide us, instead of wisdom." Nia looked into his eyes, searching for deceit, but found none. The spirits whispered around her, their voices urging her toward the path she had been destined for. "True forgiveness is not just words," she said. "It is action. If you truly wish to atone, you must rebuild, not just your village, but your hearts." The people nodded eagerly. They would follow her, not out of fear, but out of trust. From that day forward, Nia took her place as the village's spiritual guide. She did not seek revenge or demand punishment, but she ensured that no child would ever suffer as she had. She taught them kindness, wisdom, and the ways of the river spirits. Under her guidance, the village flourished like never before. The crops grew strong again, the wells filled with fresh water, and the air carried laughter instead of whispers of fear. The river, once a place of dread, became sacred, a symbol of rebirth and redemption. Years passed, and the story of Nia, the girl who had been thrown away but walked back alive, became legend. It was whispered by elders to their grandchildren, a tale of mistakes, of justice, and of a girl who defied fate itself. And so, long after she was gone, her name lived on. Not as a curse, nor a ghost, but as the heart of a village that had learned, at last, the true meaning of redemption.